Hello, my name is Craig Camp, and thank you for joining us on this episode of Troon Talk. Troon Vineyard is a Demeter Biodynamic Regenerative Organic Gold Certified farm and winery in Southern Oregon. Oregon's only farm with both certifications and one of only 4 farms globally to be Regenerative Organic Gold Certified. Few agricultural systems are more misunderstood than biodynamics. I often cringe when reading articles misrepresenting our practice as biodynamic farmers. One of the most common fallacies reports that we are burying cow horns throughout the vineyard. We don't. The list of similar misconceptions is too long to mention. I would simply describe our practice of biodynamics as a mission to eliminate any inputs not produced on our farm. On a farm producing at commercial levels, this perfect goal will probably never be attained. Our goal is to try. We view biodynamics as a practice more than a strategy. We seek to improve our practice each year, continuing our voyage to a holistic natural system. We want to work with the system nature created, not wage war on it. We view our farm as an entity, a natural living system that we must join as farmers. The essential truths of the practice of biodynamics are not fully understood. Still, modern agricultural science is now integrating many of the concepts of biodynamics into their products, which, of course, they want to patent and sell to us. Buying anything with a brand name should be something farmers avoid, if at all possible. The biodynamic preparations are part of our practice. How they work is not clearly understood, but neither is the role of soil microbiology and plant health. The research on the impact of mycorrhizal fungi and other microbiology is only in its early stages. Here, biodynamics is ahead of commercially funded soil science, as the focus of the biodynamic farmer is to farm the soil. We farm fungi. The science is catching up with us, but what they don't like about biodynamics is they can't patent the preps. In this episode, we will dig deeper into our practice with the biodynamic preparations at Troon Vineyard. This conversation will be between Troon Vineyard's Director of Agriculture, Garett Long, and famed biodynamic agricultural consultant Andrew Beedy. Garett worked at Apricot Lane, of the Biggest Little Farm documentary fame, and has his master's degree in soil science from the University of California at Davis. Andrew has spent his entire life immersed in biodynamic and organic farming. He was actually born on a biodynamic farm. He is the leading practitioner of practical biodynamics and has been consulting the Troon Vineyard since 2018. Both were mentored by the late biodynamic icon Ellen York. I'm sure you will find this freewheeling discussion on biodynamic preparations enlightening.
Hi, I'm Garett Long, the Director of Agriculture at Troon Vineyard, and I'm here today with our biodynamic consultant, Andrew Beedy. Welcome, Andrew.
Thank you, Garett, for having us. It's always nice to see you guys talk about biodynamics.
Thanks. Well, tell us a little bit about your background.
So I was born on a biodynamic dairy farm, 1980, and have been raised around farming and gardening my whole life. Started farming on my own when I was about 14, just on the weekends, and then started full-time farming, commercial horticulture in the southeast of England when I was about 24 years ago, and then started my own business about 7 or 8 years ago. 8 years now.
A consulting business.
Correct.
And that's how you came to Troon, right?
Correct, 5 years ago. So we've done 5 years work together and slowly built out you guys' systems and help you guys keep pointing in the right direction, so to speak.
My first experience in biodynamic agriculture, and actually just in farming in general, happened to be at the very same place as you. You and I met back in 2012 at Apricot Lane Farms, another certified biodynamic farm in Ventura County, California. And I came as a lowly woofer. I signed up for a 3-month work exchange and was housed in a duplex. And on my half of the side was a bunch of woofers, a bunch of 20-somethings really passionate about farming. And we were all sharing a house, sharing meals, and working 6 days a week, learning about farming. And on the other side of the duplex was our garden and orchard manager. How did you arrive at Apricot Lane?
So my mentor, Alan York, we were working on a vineyard up in the North Bay, Sonoma County, together for a number of years, and then one of Alan's clients Apricot Lane Farms was looking for a farm manager to help them, get their systems set up. So in a roundabout way, I ended up moving from Sonoma County down to Moore Park to help Apricot Lane with Alan York get their system set up. So
Yeah, I arrived there in early 2012. I was one of the first woofers there. And you're right, the system was young at the time, and we've both grown a lot, I think, since then. I think to just speak to my own experience, I absolutely fell in love with farming there in Moore Park. I fell in love with soils. I realized that was the thing that really kept me up at night, and I went to pursue my master's degree at UC Davis in soils and biogeochemistry and came back to work at the farm for another 2.5 years after that. And so the science behind soil health, the science behind biodynamic agriculture, the science behind the preps is something that really motivates me and motivates us here at Troon. And the preparations is going to be the topic of our conversation today. So why don't we just dive right in? Let's start talking about kind of the foundational field sprays, Preparation 500 and 501. These are the preps that are buried in cow horns. Why don't you give us sort of a foundational overview of 500?
Well, just to take a slight step back, so biodynamic preparations is an umbrella term for various organic and mineral, almost homeopathic remedies for farming systems and the soil itself. We break that, the collection of the preparations into 3 groups, one being preparations that are applied to the ground or the foliage of various plants. We then have a group of, it's 2 field sprays, and then we have a group of 6 compost preparations that are, again, herbal homeopathic remedies for compost. 5 of those preparations go inside the pile. The 6th is sprayed around the perimeter or the outside of the pile itself. And then we have a further canopy spray made out of equisetum arvents that is also applied to the canopy. So 3 groups, preparations.
Yeah.
But you wanted to talk about the first?
Yeah, let's dig into it. We'll talk about the compost preparations, and the horsetail, or Equisetum arvents is the Latin name for horsetail. Some people might be common with it or familiar with it by that name. But yeah, let's start with the field sprays. These are really foundational to the holistic health of a farm and really sort of set the stage for the use of the rest of the preparations, and are really based around soil fertility first and foremost. So yeah, let's start with 500. Okay, so
when we kick around these numbers, it's just a generic term for the individual prep. So Beedy 500 is a soil applied composted manure preparation designed to build soil health, both microbial and organic. So that's applied first in the season, and then we follow that later on in the growing season at specific, I'm just going to use vineyards as the example because that's your primary crop here. We apply the 501, the silica spray, the ground up quartz, at specific growth stage of the vine during the summer months, and then we at the very end of the season, in our Mediterranean climate, we then apply a further application on the soil of 500 again. So the 500 applications in our growing season bookend the various 501 silica sprays during the growing season. So that's how we use them here at Troon, and we can go into more detail about those specific timings, but just in a general way, again, bookending the 501 canopy sprays with the 500.
Yeah, and it's really, I think of it as sort of greeting the transition of seasons, if you will. if we kind of take a deep dive into what's happening on sort of global scale, in the northern hemisphere, let's talk about the transition from fall into winter. I think of it as a global in-breath, right? The earth is breathing in, so to speak. During that transition, the leaves begin to fall from trees. The rain begins to arrive for the first time after 6-7 months of no rain in this Mediterranean climate. And it's a period of decomposition. It's a period of rest. And it's also a period of relatively active microbial decomposition. A lot of people think that microbes aren't very active during the winter time because of the colder temperatures, but really this is a key moment in terms of the seasonal rhythms of Earth in which microbes are actively decomposing those leaves that have fallen. When there's soil moisture, I think about it not just based on, or I think about microbial activity, not just based around temperature, but really fueled by moisture. And if you've got all of these dormant microbes who've been not doing anything or relatively nothing for most of the growing season, it's really only once those fall rains arrive that you start to really wake those microbes up. So it's during that winter season that we prepare 500. These preparations, too, we might note a little bit of the background of where they came from and who suggested them. Rudolf Steiner gave a week-long lecture in what is modern-day Poland in 1924. We're actually just on the precipice of celebrating the 100-year anniversary of Steiner's lecture. And that week-long lecture was recorded, transcribed into a book that's now known as the Agriculture course, or just Agriculture is the title. And it was translated from its original German into countless different languages around the world. Steiner prescribed, if you will, a approach to agriculture that views the farm as a holistic organism. And just like humans, we have all of these organ systems that play different functions in keeping our bodies healthy and balanced. We can break down our food, we can get rid of wastes, we have an immune system and a nervous system, and all of these different systems and organs interact. And there's a nice metaphor to perceive the farm as this holistic, integrated system, integrated between crops, animals, livestock, compost, microorganisms, and of course the people who are tending the land. The farm is really viewed as this reflection of the people. And without getting too tangential with it, I bring up Steiner because he was the one who suggested the use of these preparations. 500 through 508 were these originals. And he also, for what it's worth, encouraged experimentation with preparations too. He used herbs that are native to Central Europe that a lot of Europeans would be familiar with. And there's a lot of them that are also native to or have very similar species out here on the west coast of the U.S. And these preparations were prescribed for particular uses. Each of them has a designated use and a relationship often with a particular nutrient or element. And
well, just like you just alluded to, these first indications of the uses of these herbs, and herbs being yarrow, dandelion, chamomile, valerian, stingy nettle, and oak bark. These qualities and the relationships of these plants with specific plant nutrients was indicated by Steiner in what now seems a very, with a very broad brush, where, and if you go back and listen to the lectures that are now in audio, you can really see that the doors were fully left open for further experimentation and further refinement and further development by the agricultural circle, as it was called originally, group of farmers that first put these experiments together.
Yeah.
So if we go all the way back to the beginning, as you mentioned, 99 something years ago, there has been a whole wealth of experimentation and further development from these first indications, and that's where you end up with a more complete view of the benefits of these various herb-based, compost-based, mineral-based preparations, as we're calling them.
And so Steiner prescribed the practice or the preparation to occur at certain times of the year to really align with these seasonal rhythms. And so to kind of get back to 500, the preparation occurs around the fall equinox. For us here in southern Oregon, we do it a little bit later because the rain hasn't even arrived by the time September 20-something comes around. But we, again, sort of greet that transition from fall into winter as the rains arrive, is also when we prepare this preparation 500. We talked about the reasons why it's used or the timing of the burial. It spends about 6 months in the ground from that fall equinox to the spring equinox. And then talk a little bit about the actual process of making 500. What are the ingredients? What are we actually burying in the ground for 6 months?
Sure. Okay. So 500. We're going to start with that one as the first one for discussion. 500 is made out of cow manure, organic, preferably biodynamic from your own farm, ideally from a lactating cow, which will then, through its milk production, have a higher calcium component of its manure. We then take that manure and we fill cow's horns, not bull's horns. Those are then buried at about 2 feet depth around the fall equinox, and then composted in those horns for 6 months, and then we lift them up around the second equinox. And then you mentioned the process of the in-breath in our growing area in the fall. We target these transitions throughout the season for specific biodynamic uses. So 500 being a very, compost, microbial life,
biological
remedy for the soil. We target the burying around that in-breath to encourage further decomposition.
Yeah. A lot of people, I think, have this misconception about cow horns. And so just to clarify a little bit more, the vessel that is being sort of loaded up with cow manure is sort of a cap of the cow horn. The actual cow's horn has blood vessels, it has nerves, it has this tissue inside of it that is the shape of the horn, but then on the outside of that is this cap, this hardened cap that is made mostly of keratin. It's very similar to our fingernails, actually, or to the exoskeleton of insects. Very similar material. And then it's that cap that is often the byproduct of processing of sort of cow slaughter. The horns are no longer needed, but that cap can be fairly easily removed. And that horn is the actual vessel that's buried. And one other, I think, really common misconception, too, is that biodynamic farms have cow horns just buried all over the farm as this... Yeah.
There's many misconceptions about, the use of cow horns, and I have been doing this for a number of seasons, and I cannot tell you the amount of times that, it's why cow's horns, and it's a very valid question, because when you really think about it, when you have a question like that, and you take a step back, it's a pretty superficial level. is a pretty odd thing to be doing. But on a more thought through, considered view of the process, we're taking a very biologically active, balanced manure from a very earthly animal. And when I say earthly, the cow itself as a being, spends 8 hours of its life, 8 hours of its day eating, 8 hours of its day chewing, and 8 hours of its day sleeping. And it will go through that rhythm consistently, like clockwork, every day of its life, looking down at the ground, with its horns being its only connection to the cosmos, or planetary influence, or lunar influence, or solar influences. That's its only connection, and its only ability to sense those influences on its being. So when we take cow manure, a very biologically active material, we then connect it to the sense organ of that very earthly animal. We then, actively, intentionally bury it in the soil in specific locations on the farm that are not too wet, not too dry. We bury at a very intentional transition of the growing season, being the transition from our desert-like Mediterranean summer months and the first rains, going into the in-breath of the year. And then as we lift that up in the spring, the idea is we are adding further sensitivity to the growing season by then applying that very balanced, microbially active element of a cow's rumen as a homeopathic remedy on the soil to further allow the soil to be receptive and sensitive to microbial life. So that's...
Yeah, and you just said the word rumen. This is the name of the cow's multi-chambered stomach. It's the basis of ruminant, which is the group of multi-chambered stomach grazing herbivore animals, cows, sheep, goats, like that. We're all familiar with the word rumination. If a human is sort of sitting there lost in thought, contemplating, thinking, processing, there's a similarity with the nature of the cow, as you were describing.
Well, I personally do it for 8 hours a day, so...
Just chew your cud.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, I think this perception, even if we're projecting these sort of human qualities and suggesting that the cow seems lost in thought as she has her glassy eyes chewing her cud for 8 hours a day, I think it's a reasonable consideration to suggest maybe that the cow is a thoughtful, contemplative animal, sensing the nutrition that she's getting from her food. She swallows it, it gets processed by microbes, she burps it back up, she processes it, chews it a little more, gets a little different flavor nuance maybe, and is very thoughtful about it. And I even would take it one step further and suggest, you were talking about the horns sort of sensing this external environment, but I think a strong case could be made, as they are innervated and full of blood vessels, that same nourishment, that same digestive potential that she's sensing from the food, you might say, is being reflected from her rumen up through her nervous system and vascular system into her horns and back to her rumen, and that process repeats for many hours every day, as you said, as clockwork, as she just repeats this process, very attuned to the earth through her hooves and through her digestion. And so I think the reason why the cow horn and the manure were chosen is that it's, and the reason why it's buried in the winter, which we could extend this same sort of contemplative, reflective nature that we enter into during our sort of winter holiday season is reflective as well of that nature of the cow. And so when you talk about sort of sensitizing the farm to be receptive, to be open, and also, yes, fertile and full of diverse microbes in a very practical sense, I think, in a more esoteric sense, there is a relationship between the nature of the cow, the season of the burial of Preparation 500, and what your intention is behind attuning your farm to that rhythm and to that process. Shall we leave it there and move on to sort of the counterbalance?
Yeah, let's
of
go
500.
to...
Let's go to 501.
Yeah, go to 501.
So as you said, these numbers are just sort of generically ascribed to it. What is Preparation 501 made of? What are the ingredients?
So 501, again, using cow's horns, but we replaced the cow manure with ground up quartz crystals, which and obviously the chemical component is silica. Silica, a very important element in the light ether, as we call it. So instead of applying it to the soil, we apply it to the canopy and the air around the canopy. The process of making it is, again, buried in the ground in cow's horns. The silica we mix into a little bit of rainwater to make almost like a paint consistency, material. Then fill the cow's horns. We put a clay cap to the top, and instead of the horns being buried with the wider end down, like the 500, it's buried with the wider end up. So
the wider end being opposite the pointy end of the horn, the open end of the horn.
Correct.
Yeah.
So instead of buried in the winter, it's buried in the springtime, similar time when we lift the 500 and the first equinox, and then 6 months in the ground during the warm summer months, and then lifted the following fall. So as you can see, the 500 and the 501 work to complement each other, applying, so in a management, say, example, applying 500 without 501, it's better than not applying any preps at all. But if you want to see a true benefit, then pairing those those two preparations or field sprays at specific times is really where you'll see a true benefit on your farm. And going beyond that, applying 500 and 501 for one season is certainly better than not doing it at all, but where you will see the greatest benefit is by that repetition and building that rhythm over multiple growing seasons. So having the commitment to do it once is fantastic. Having the commitment to do it multiple times is even better.
And this is coming from a lifetime practitioner of doing this. When did you first apply your first preparations? What age were you?
Well, the first interaction with agriculture was probably when I was still in diapers, biodynamic diapers, I'm sure, knowing my parents. Probably made out of, anyway, don't need to go into too much detail there. Going off on a little tangent for you. My first interaction with agriculture was, I remember my dad telling me later on in years, I think he told me in my teenage years, so I wasn't very impressed, but he remembers, when I was young in diapers, being in like the loafing barn where our cattle were, we had Jersey cows, and then, I'd just be playing around, in the straw with the animals, and then I was just, he remembers saying that and see me like across the barn with me on one side of the old salt lick, like licking the salt, and on the other side was this 1,000-pound heifer that was just kind of licking the other side. And you go, it looks all right to me.
It seems pretty safe.
So that was the first interaction with agriculture, and then first interaction of biodynamics was probably in my 4th grade, which is I went through Waldorf School, Steiner School, over in the southeast of England, and in the 4th grade we do like a biodynamic gardening class. So beyond just the always being around our home garden and being raised on a 300 odd acre farm or a estate in England, that was probably the first direction that was specific to making 500.
Yeah.
4th grade.
It's amazing.
And I'm still learning now.
Absolutely.
I still modify the plan.
It's a lifelong
So that's the good thing
practice.
about biodynamics is you have 2 choices if you get involved in biodynamics. And I know it's not specific about the preparations, but just biodynamics in general. You have 2 choices at the very beginning. You can be very dogmatic about it, or you can be very pragmatic about it.
Mm-hmm.
And over the years, I've found that the more pragmatic you are about it, while carrying the highest intention to what you do on your farm, is where you will end up with a successful farming enterprise.
Yeah. Well, I want to dig into some of the personal relationships and share the meaning of the prep work to me as well. But the description that you had between 500 and 501 is that they're very complementary to each other, and they're sort of opposites in many ways, right? We're describing 500 and its burial over the winter as being reflective of and reminiscent of that sort of in-breath, that rumination, that period of contemplation, if you will, and decomposition. As we move past the spring equinox, the days start getting longer, the days start getting warmer, seeds start germinating and waking up, plants start growing up, right? All these perennial plants and trees start leafing out and growing and flowering. And ultimately, over the course of summertime, a lot of these plants will set fruit. If we're thinking about grapes or apple trees or whatever, berries, we've got the production of fruit. And in biodynamics and in anthroposophy, the nature of the fruit is reflective of fire. The nature of flower is reflective of light. The leaf is reflective of water, and the root is to earth. And so we move into this sort of spring and summer rhythm that 501 is really designed to accentuate. So as you sort of as you move into that summertime, what is the hold on, I'm stammering over my question here.
Well, I think I understand the question, where it's this complementary process that we're trying to build, or complementary rhythm that we're trying to build throughout the farm system, and just using Troon as the example, is viticulture and vines and grape quality and wine quality. The use of the silica, if you just look at quartz, through a ray of sunshine, you get, everyone knows you get a rainbow on the wall, where by taking this chemical element, crushing it, we are building many more angles into that, or prisms into that material, than through the sensitivity building process of being buried in the summer months in a cow's horn. We then look the following season to take that light imbued material, when applied at specific times at the growth stage of the vines, then this is intended to improve vine grape quality, which is then processed into a high quality wine.
And we talked about intention before as well. You know, there's a lot of intention that goes into the prep work itself. There's a lot of thoughtfulness that went into the selection of the herbs, a lot of observation. I mean, arguably centuries, millennia of observation by, you know, ancestors of not just Central Europeans, but of indigenous folks all around the world, and our experimentation through human evolution to get to know herbs and understand their medicinal qualities was the foundational work that Steiner, I think, was utilizing and leveraging in his selection of these herbs for these preparations. But another version of intentionality specific to 500 and 501 is the preparation of the pit itself. You know, we talk about almost all of these preparations are buried in the ground over a certain period. There may be an above ground portion of the prep work, but everything really spends a certain part of the year in the earth. And talk a little bit about that intentionality and what it takes to really prepare a pit, or just, which would otherwise just be a hole in the ground, frankly, but it becomes so much more in guiding the transformation of, say, cow manure into this finished product.
Well, everything about biodynamics is you have to have intention in what you're doing. If you don't have intention for taking these steps to build vitality in your farm system, if you don't have intentionality in every step of the way, then, well, it's better than doing nothing at all, but it is not the best way to do it. So preparing the pit is done through, well, we did it ourselves in the fall of last year, and it's a very you need to choose an area that is very not too wet, not too dry, stays aerobic during the winter months, because the process of decomposition, we want the aerobic decomposition. So we actually chose an area that was a little bit compacted. It was chosen because it is in the heart of our you guys' business, where we can further educate people on biodynamics. So it's centrally located. We actually, and this is going back to in biodynamics being dogmatic, you have to prepare that hole. We just had to get a heavy piece of equipment, dig out the hole with an excavator. Then we applied about 2 yards of biodynamic compost, mixed it into the soil, then buried the horns. Well, first we added probably 2 feet of that amended soil, then buried the horns, and then filled over the top with this amended biodynamic rich soil. So you have to not just be so intentional in putting cow manure in a cow's horn. You have to be intentional about ideally using from a lactating cow, really building the soil health around that. The horns, when they're buried, you have to be intentional about the timing of when these are placed in the ground. You have to be intentional about when they are lifted out of the ground. So being really involved and thoughtful and intentional with those steps of the prep making process is really important. Again, some people perhaps don't do it to the same intentional level, and there may very well be people out there that have more attention than us.
There most certainly are.
But You have to do things as well as you can, and that commitment to the process will be reflected in your vine health.
In the quality.
And it is. Like,
Yeah.
it's not some kind of esoteric, hippie thing to say, but you can really tell when a farm manager or a viticulturist or just really doesn't have interest in it, and that lack of attention will just be reflected.
Yeah, and conversely, the quality will be present, and I think especially in wine, which is such a unique product that is already reflective of place, to have a really sensitized, tuned-in biodynamic system that is mature and many, many years of preparation and dedication and commitment, as you said, to this farming practice. It really shows in the wine. It really shows, it reflects a sense of place. We talk about terroir as this concept, right, of being reflective of soil type and climate and cool season, warm season, old world, new world, all of these ideas that are descriptors that are used in wine, but ultimately you can get right down to, in our case here in Southern Oregon, the Kubli Bench. Our Troon wines are reflective of this old river terrace of the Applegate River, of these granitic soils, of this Southern Oregon climate, and ultimately a reflection of the farmers here and the winemaker, of course, and the entire team. This is a reflection of, our wines are a reflection of this communal effort, right? So a biodynamic system really begins to set itself apart through intentionality and through the preparations. So,
well, the preparations are certainly the most defining difference between organic agriculture and biodynamic agriculture.
yeah, that's right. Simply from a certification standpoint, the use of the preps is really a very defining characteristic of biodynamics. There's no other framework, or there's no other approach to farming that utilizes this same prep work.
Not as far as I'm aware.
Yeah. So we've talked about the two field sprays, 508, horsetail. We mentioned it earlier. Equisetum arvense is the very specific species of common horsetail. There's lots of horsetail species out there. Steiner said, this is the king. This is the one. You want the common horsetail. It has a different form. It has a different silica content. Let's talk about 508. This is another field spray. You said that we spray on the canopy, on the above ground part of the plant, as opposed to onto the soil. And it has a lot of particular uses in a vineyard context as well. But before we get to the practical part of how it's applied and why it's applied, let's actually just talk about the plant and sort of its relationship with silica. This plant, this Equisetum, is actually a very ancient plant. Before any flowering plants came around, before flowering plants evolved, this sort of ancient, very dinosaur era looking plant was really dominant on the earth, and the way that it reproduces is with spores as opposed to seeds, and so its form has this very upright nature. It sort of branches out almost like a conifer or a pine tree would, and a conifer is actually much more similar to this Equisetum than any sort of flowering plant. But the point is, it's been here on Earth for a very, very long time, and evolutionarily has changed very little. It is sort of a master of its environment, and it's often found in these wet, sort of riparian environments, wetlands, along stream banks, anywhere where there's adequate groundwater year-round is where Equisetum is going to thrive. And it's in that environment, in that wet, kind of dank environment, that fungus can usually thrive, and not a lot of oxygen in the system. And yet this plant has found a way to persist for who knows how many millions of years. And my perception of its perseverance, its ability to persist and not just persist but thrive, is largely due to its relationship with silica. So talk a little bit about that.
Well, certainly, the relationship with silica, the high silica content, what we are trying to do in making, this preparation 508, as it's known, taking fresh horsetail, finely chopped up, either dried into a tea for use later, for storing and for use later, or fresh fermented tincture. This preparation is then applied as a preventative tool onto the canopy of our vines, where we are trying to build the light ether around the canopy and the fruit that is able to resist powdery mildew becoming overly prevalent within the vineyard and greatly reducing grape and wine quality. So applying the 508 to the canopy at specific times, we are looking to preempt the development of powdery mildew, which is a common threat to our wine quality.
Yeah, I think that's actually something I learned from you and also from Alan York, who you mentioned earlier as a mentor very early on, is the importance of preventative treatments. We don't have a lot of materials available to us in organic or biodynamic agriculture, and in fact, materials available in order to sort of kill pathogens or kill insects. In fact, it's sort of counter to everything that we're really trying to do in terms of promote biodiverse life. We intentionally invite in wildlife. We want there to be diversity at every level, from plants to animals to microbes, people, like that. All of that is a part of the system and helps keep the system resilient and help balance any sort of population explosions, be it pest or otherwise. And what we have is preventative medicine. We have this ability where we can set up the ecosystem, or we can apply these preparations like 508 to the canopy before some sort of powdery mildew infection sets in.
Right, so building the health of the system is by actively being preventative, or taking preventative actions that we, on powdery mildew being our example, from really having a negative effect on you guys' harvest and wine quality. So although we are trying to build a balanced, resilient farm system that greatly minimizes pest and disease pressure, we can guarantee that we will have powdery mildew throughout our vineyard if we don't take preventative measures. So turning to our biodynamic toolbox, and 508 is our primary antifungal tool as a preventative measure, then applying this on a very routine schedule at specific days early on in the growing season, you are, in theory and in practice, outcompeting the powdery mildew from really taking hold by covering the vines in the protective layer of silica. This is in a organic form instead of a mineral form like 501. So using a mineral 501 spray coupled with an organic silica spray, we are looking to bring balance both in the mineral and organic realm within the canopy, not just within the soil itself.
Right, this kind of idea that we were talking about, that counterbalance, that sort of opposite polarity that 501 and 500 represent, is the balance of soil health and canopy health. The relationship between earth and water conversed opposite with light and fire.
Well, there's always that push-pull, right? It's just that's the nature of farming, and that's the nature of horticulture or viticulture or whatever other form you want to use. It's building that balance in the push-pull of various processes throughout the season. And these preps allow for this push-pull and this balance to be much more sensitive and have a greater ability to have a fully, sustainable farm system.
Yeah.
But we are in, we have to be, we are a business. We have a mortgage to pay. So we have to take preventative measures to prevent powdery mildew from getting out of hand, because we would be terrible farmers, making wonderful preparations, but terrible farmers if we don't take these preventative measures. So hence the dogmaticness.
Yes.
If that's a word.
We'd have a lot of thirsty customers if we let the powdery mildew get out of control.
Yeah.
I want to talk about one last practical aspect that all three of these preparations have in common, which is stirring. You talked about brewing 508 into a tea. You talked about, or we talked about spraying 500 on the ground, 501 on the canopy. So these are preparations that are in a really dilute form in water, ideally rainwater, right? We definitely don't want anything like chlorine or fluoride or anything added to drinking water to inhibit microbial growth. Ideally, we want rainwater. Talk about the stirring process for each of these preparations, what that looks like, and why dynamization is important before applying.
Okay, so just to give you guys a scale, 500 is applied at about a quarter cup per acre. 501, the silica, is applied at about, anywhere between a quarter to a half teaspoon per acre. 508 is, there's varying opinions on what the measurement is, because that was not really indicated with any precision in the original lectures. I tend to use the dry material at about a half liter per 1 gallon to make a tea, per acre, something like that.
Yeah.
But then the application of the material is in a very dilute, again, homeopathic dose within the vineyard. Just for our equipment that we use to apply, we're at about 5 gallons of rainwater per half a teaspoon of silica 501, if we're using that as the example. Similar method or rate per acre with 500. The dynamization, as it's become to be known, is the act of stirring and mixing the field sprays. You're going to use 501 as the example here. 501, half a teaspoon per acre, 5 gallons of water per acre. We make about 10 acres worth per stirring, because that's just the scale that we can apply, on our management plan. That is then stirred for 1 hour, which is a very clear indication. In fact, one of the only clear indications or specific indications given by Steiner in his lectures, that was stirring for an hour is the appropriate time for that stirring. The process of doing it, stirred in opposing vortices. So if you picture a wine barrel with a top popped off, 50 gallons of water in there. The 501, because that's our example, stirred with some kind of long-handled, whatever you have on hand.
Like a wood stick or
something like that.
Dowel
Sure.
or something.
Sure.
Yeah.
That's, you stir continuously clockwise until you form a vortex, ideally that reaches the bottom of the barrel. But at the beginning, that's pretty hard to do, to achieve like a full depth to the vortex. Then once you've created that, then you turn the other direction, you create chaos, then through your intention and your stirring, you create balance. Then through your intention, you turn the other direction, you create chaos, you create balance, you create chaos, you create balance. And as you go through that hour of stirring, it might take you 1 minute to form a vortice at the very beginning. By the time you're nearing the end, it might take you 30 seconds to form twice the size vortex. So in that one example, you can see how the intention of the farmer can really have a direct effect on every part of the farming system. This example, it's how long it takes to form a vortex. So then we'll load that into our spray rigs because we use equipment to apply it to the ground. That we apply at the rate of 5 gallons an acre, every other row, apply to the canopy. There's purists that are out there that, it should be stirred with, not in contact with wood. There shouldn't be any electromagnetic fields around, i.e. no cell phones, not near any transformers, not under power lines. First thing in the morning, just before sunrise. This is for 501. Then there is a more pragmatic approach where we have to fit that into our system. So we use a stirring machine, which is a stainless steel machine specifically designed for stirring these preps. So the motor is set aside away from the drum, that is the stirring vessel. There is no plastic involved, it's all stainless steel. We then have the machine stir it for 1 hour, and then we apply it to the ground. If we have an opportune time where, say, a slightly less busy time of year, we might, choose one of the preparations and stir it by hand. But over the season, it is a mix of stirring by hand and it is a mix of using machinery for it.
Yeah, it's been a real benefit to be able to use the stirring machine, but I've also done plenty of stirs myself by hand. As I'm stirring this, it becomes this sort of meditative process for me. It allows my brain to sort of quiet and focus and put intention into the stirring process and intention into connecting honestly with the farm, with the system. One version of connecting with the farm is thinking about your to-do list, but another version of that is settling your brain, easing your soul, thinking about the nourishment that is going to come from the food, thinking about the community that you are nourishing. These are all thoughts that are going through my head as I'm putting this intention into the stir. Andrew, what are some of the things that you are thinking of or doing or contemplating as you're stirring?
Well, as you mentioned, this can be a very, very meditative process, or a time for not just meditating on the act of stirring, but meditating on how can we further develop our biodynamic system within this vineyard. So taking that opportune time of an hour to look at other opportunities of further building diversity in our management systems and opportunities for building quality of the grapes and the wine. I know last time I was stirring, I was thinking about the dandelion prep, just for some reason, and I had this idea of, we're working with silica, working with 501, we're working with ground quartz, which is all very, light ether, part of our management, and it's, well, how do we further increase the light ether or the silica and the within the growing canopy? And I was just thinking about 506, where it has very high silica. It has a tight relationship with Jupiter and the planet. It has a very light ether element to it. So perhaps there's an opportunity of making a dandelion tea that when we apply some of our foliar sprays on you guys' vines, perhaps there's an opportunity to make, like a dandelion tea that will allow us to, in theory, increase silica content, coupled as part of the process of applying 501 also into the canopy. So using the hour can be a really good blessing, because you get a break from your email coming through on your phone.
Yeah.
And using that time to reflect on how do we make our system at Troon more unique to our farming system.
Yeah, this is I think one of the challenges of our modern world, is actually slowing down and taking a breath, really focusing, observing, being thoughtful. I've always related, ever since I learned about the prep work from Alan, from you, from Matthias Baker, another amazing mentor of mine, the nature of the prep work has always felt like a yoga practice or a meditation practice. And that word practice really means a lot to me, because one, it harkens back to that idea of consistency. Sure, do it once, great. You do a yoga practice once, you stretch out, you probably feel better. If you have a daily yoga practice or a weekly rhythm, you begin to attune your body to that same practice, that same time of day, those same rhythms, those same movements. And the prep work, as we do it seasonally, although we may only do it once a year or interact with each prep a couple of times a year, it begins to tune you into that rhythm and into that practice. And as you were just saying, you were contemplating the dandelion prep. We get a few opportunities a year to actually go out and pick dandelions or bury them. But ultimately, we have many opportunities to practice and to reflect upon those qualities, those relationships. And biodynamics is really all about relationships, and this practice of slowing down and being intentional and methodically doing the prep work, be it dogmatically or pragmatically. The prep work itself is a practice that can really bring a lot of joy, a lot of intention, and a lot of really focus to your farming. And ultimately, if you think about biodynamics not just as an approach to farming, but as an approach to sort of the betterment of the human spirit, if you will, the prep work is a lens by which we can have that experience and hopefully share it with others.
Well, that's certainly a very thoughtful description of biodynamics, and I can't really relate it to the daily yoga routine, because I'd probably pull a muscle. But I can relate it to, if you have a commitment and a dedication to quality in everything that you do in your farming process throughout the seasons over multiple years, not just the soil and your plants within your system or animals within your system will reflect that in their quality, but it will also allow for neighboring soils to benefit from the sprays and the energy that they bring to the area. So it's not just about doing things well within you guys' 100 acres, but it's also if it's a net benefit that it improves the area as a whole, well, then that's also fantastic. So if we keep quality and the forefront of our wine, from our prep making to our soil management to our plant management to our wine harvest to our wine production, then that wine will reflect that quality. and it surely does.
Absolutely. The proof is in the pudding, as they say. There's work being done to study the preps in more academic institutions and use these more traditional measures of weight and number and quantifiable benefit. And as more and more research comes out, I'm excitedly following along, but I think a lot of biodynamic practitioners would simply tell you that they can't really explain why the preps work or how they work, but that if you do it and you do it consistently and you come back 5 years, 10 years later to a biodynamic farm that has matured into this being through the use of this consistency and this intentionality, there's no doubt about it. The vitality, the vigor, the diversity, the beauty, and ultimately the nourishment that comes from that farm is very purely reflected in a way that you may or may not be able to explain or fully comprehend, but it's there.
Or even the well-known practitioners over the past, like Peter Proctor in New Zealand. You read some of his books or his audios or his videos or whatever.
Alan Chadwick.
He's perfectly content to say, if you think about these biodynamic practices and these preps on a superficial level, it's a pretty odd thing to be doing.
Yeah.
But if you think of it in a more holistic view within your farming system, and you really try to understand the processes and the intention of making these, then it kind of becomes pretty enjoyable thing to do.
Absolutely. Well, Andrew, I've learned a ton from you over the last 10 years of working together. And I was thinking about this the other day, contemplating on the 100-year anniversary. I can very directly trace my lineage back to Steiner by not too many generations. If I go from me to you as my mentor to Alan York, who studied under Alan Chadwick at Santa Cruz. Chadwick was a direct disciple, worked with Steiner, and then really brought that to the west coast of the U.S. And from just whatever that is, 5 generations, there's a very direct connection to this only 100-year-old practice that is really based in ancestral wisdom. And I'm very grateful for you joining us today, for being a part of this project at Troon, and for your mentorship, not just to me, but to the whole staff and to all of the biodynamic farms and practitioners that you've touched in your career. So thank you.
You are quite welcome. It's my pleasure. I'm going to go and practice some yoga.
We are happy to share this podcast with you from Troon Vineyard, a Demeter Biodynamic and Regenerative Organic certified winery in Oregon's Applegate Valley. We farm like the world depends on it and produce authentic, naturally crafted wines. We will be sharing these in-depth podcasts several times a month. To learn more, I encourage you to visit our website at troonvineyard.com and those of the Regenerative Organic Alliance at regenorganic.org and Demeter Biodynamics at demeter-usa.org. Thanks for sharing our voyage to regenerative agriculture with us.